the Robert and Francis Fullerton Museum of Art's Art Hour podcast, the show where we talk about art, history, and everything in between. I'm your host, Lana Klaib, and today we have two familiar faces. You might recognize them from our past podcast where we talked about art and mental health. So I'm just going to reintroduce them if you guys haven't seen it. So first we have Alison Petty and we also have Manijeh Badiee. So thank you both so much for joining me. So we're going to go into quick introductions so you guys are familiar with who we are talking to. So I'll start with Alison. Alison is a professor here at CSUC of ceramics. She has been working for over 15 years in sculptural art objects in porcelain, glass, and rubber. And her work is included in over 50 national and international exhibitions, and she is also the coordinator for the grad students here at CSUC. And then next we have Manijeh. So she is a associate professor of psychology here at CSUC also. She is a licensed counseling psychologist, and her research focuses on social groups, social justice, and diversity, specifically with understudied groups. So there we go. So thank you both so much for joining me. Thank you again. Nice to see you guys again. So we can kind of go ahead and get started. So last time we talked about, just to recap for maybe those who missed it, talking about art in the sense of, what it can do in art therapy and how it can be really helpful. It can be, we mentioned a tool for, de-stressing or, channeling your emotions and just being in tune and mindful. So now we're going to kind of flip. And, when we look at the cliche artist, we think of probably of, Van Gogh, for example, someone who's struggling with mental health, the starving artist, and, kind of like the mad genius stereotype. So we're just going to kind of be unpacking that. Is it true or not? And, what are the links between having, a mental disorder, a mental illness of some sort, and being creative? So I guess we can just go into it. There's a lot to talk about. So let's see, where can we start? So I think we could start. I just realized this is probably the longest I've gone on with talking, but we should probably start with, some backgrounds so we kind of all understand, what we're talking about. There's a lot of artists throughout history. We have, Van Gogh, Edvard Munch, Francisco de Goya, Frida Kahlo, and those are like visual artists. It even stretches to, poets and writers, just creative people in general, musicians. There's so many cases of people, struggling with mental health. So I guess we could start with Manijeh. Do you think that, we're cherry picking almost, like, there's only a few examples, but, overwhelmingly everyone is, kind of in tune with their mental health? Or do you think that there might be some kind of trend between being creative and, struggling with mental health?
Well, I think that there's, I think we have to look at how we define these terms, because what is being creative generally? Creative is like thinking something outside the norm, right? Like you're thinking something a little bit different from the norm. What is mental illness? Behavior outside the norm, right? So of course there's going to be some overlap there, because there's, like that's, and also if you think about mental illness, it's culturally bound, because for example, like someone who overworks themselves, like someone who's, there's not a scientific term, but like a workaholic in popular terms, that causes like stress related illnesses, that causes damage to physical and mental health. That has a lot, and that affects a lot of people, but that's never going to be considered a mental illness because we value that as a culture. Right. So what I think that there's probably other kinds of mental illnesses that were not, or things that are harmful to someone that are not defined as mental illness, that are pretty prominent, but we don't have, like, because we're not measuring those, we're not measuring how much people are overworking themselves, like as mental illness, then like, yes, I think and also because we have that stereotype, like the tortured artist, it's like 40%, I think dentists are also have mental illness or depressed. There's other professions where, mental illness is also very high. And again, it's how we're measuring it, right? And so I think but I think it's also like, that behavior outside the norm. I think sometimes in certain circles, like there's certain professions that in our culture, in a capitalist culture, are more valued than others. And I think creative pursuits might not be valued by people's families, some people's families, or by people's cultures, or by people's, or maybe compensated fairly sometimes for the impact that they can have, on people. Like, I feel like there's not fair compensation. And, as we were talking about in the last podcast, when you're not having your financial needs met, that definitely relates to mental health issues. There's no, and when you're not treated as when something that's important to you is not treated as valuable by society or by people around you, then that's also affects mental health. So I think the societal treatment of artists, I think that could also be, part of it. And then when there is a stereotype about your group, we tend to internalize that stereotype before we're aware of it. So like if we've heard that stereotype, like, oh, tortured artist or something, like maybe like people just unconsciously feel like they have to do that. Or even if they're not tortured, maybe they're not even a good artist or something, that tends to happen like when there's a stereotype. So I think there's different things that might play a role in that particular correlation.
Right. Alison, in your practice, being a practicing artist, being in shows and also working with, art students, do you notice, between, art students, maybe other group of students, that there's, an increase in, mental struggles?
Well, I definitely notice that students talk a lot about their mental health struggles, but it's probably because I'm pretty honest about my own. And so I kind of I open that window of conversation with them. And that is a little bit selfish on my part. Like I kind of just have done it because I went through therapy and I was able to really understand and kind of put that, okay, social anxiety is this, and I know how to deal with it now. And part of my way of dealing with it is that I just kind of normalize it. Like it helps me handle social situations, basically. And so very quickly, I'll never forget one day I did an artist talk at Pasadena City College, and I was speaking to a group of ceramic students. And I kind of had this epiphany while I was talking, and I just said, this work is all about my anxiety and all about, kind of the aftermath of or those feelings of kind of internal struggle and tension that I feel, and it just kind of like just is all over the wall, basically, right? And they all just, and afterwards, they all, not all, but many of them were like, thank you so much. I can't believe I have that problem too. And I was like, yeah. And, when we all start talking about it, actually sort of, we realize we're not alone, first of all, which is pretty amazing, because it's a pretty lonely feeling, right? When you feel like all your alarm bells are going off inside your body and you're like, but when you find out other people go through that too, you actually are like, okay, so I'm not the only one, that's good. And then I started to realize that, that's actually part of my authentic voice, right? And that is what makes me up as that's one of my driving forces as an artist, and I can't undo that. I'll never forget, my mom always thought that I came into the world fighting because I was born breech. And so it was a hard passage to the world. And she says to me that, I came out fighting. And so there's always like this kind of anxiety about me, but that's also a good thing, because it's come out in my art practice, basically. And I've kind of found a way to celebrate that instead of something that I felt like I had to hide or dismiss or cover up or compensate for. In fact, it's actually a strength of mine. So I've learned to kind of handle it that way. But back to students, I think it's extremely common that students are suffering from anxiety. I think, and I'm not a clinician at all, but they talk about feeling anxious. I mean, having gone through the pandemic, all our Zoom interactions and being on screen, I think has really set off, and being on both on Zoom screen, but also all the technology that we deal with all day long, and the swiping of TikTok and Instagram and all those other problems are definitely weighing on students. And I think students carry heavy loads. Like, I think students are not just going to university, but they're working and they have a lot of pressures and responsibilities at home. They're juggling a lot of things. So, and then the justification piece. Often students have to justify studying art. It's not and justify it as a viable career choice. So, there's a lot of unknowns. There's a lot of risks involved, right? But that's what art making is. It's risk taking, but the rewards can be amazing. So it's worth it.
Right. So at least for me, I remember growing up, I was always, an artsy person, drawing, and a lot of my friends were too. And I remember, going through, like primary school, just going through my normal schooling and into college. I always remember a lot of people also being very, like, having low self-esteem about, maybe the way they look or their art, specifically with their art too. Do you both notice that trend too? Like, maybe, especially because art is so personal that, you tend to be really self-conscious about, what people might think about it. Would you guys agree with that? Yeah.
I would.
Yeah.
Are you asking if they have lower self-esteem than other people?
Yeah.
Oh,
I don't know. I think they're just more
about
vulnerable about it. They're more open about it. I don't know if they have lower self-esteem. Like, the data shows that girls' self-esteem tends to plummet as teenagers.
Right.
So that's definitely like something that research has shown. But I think like artists are more open about, because they're expressing themselves, like that's part of what they're doing, right? Like, so I think there's just more openness to talk about it, but that self-esteem like plummeting is pretty common, unfortunately, for boys too. It's just for girls, it's more like tied to looks and other things, but yeah, so that self-esteem tends to unfortunately drop when you're younger, but I think a lot of people don't talk about it.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah. I would just say that I would kind of echo what Manijeh just said, but this idea that you are putting yourself out there, maybe it's not yourself, but maybe it's an artwork, but you have a very intimate relationship with that artwork. You put everything you have into it, typically, and it is the risk is there. So I would say, and then we do this thing called critique, where we all go in and talk about it and say what we see, and what is this, how is this working, what is this saying, and is it being understood or misunderstood? That's really putting yourself on the line in a lot of ways through whatever mode of art you're showing or sharing. And I think it's deeply tied. There's just no doubt about it.
Right. So we kind of talked about how, when you're making a piece, you're really pouring a lot of yourself into it. Maybe your past experiences, your emotions, or what you're thinking at the moment. So, it might be hard for, an artist to see, like, yeah, this, like, pieces are seen as an extension of you almost. Like, I know that me personally, like, if someone asks if they can keep a painting of mine, I'm like, no, you can't keep it. Like, this is part of me. Is that a benefit in art, or is it important for artists to learn that they are not the piece, that the piece is just an object, and kind of separate themselves from it? That, if there's a negative critique on it, they're not taking it as a personal attack. Like, is it good to be so tied to your art, or should we be more separated? And this can go to either of you.
I mean, well, I'll just jump in and just say, I just think it depends on the type of artwork And the maturity level, like where are you at in your journey as an artist? Or like, is this a breakthrough thing that you just made? You know, sometimes it's worth holding on to something. And you just following that gut instinct, like, I don't know why, but I'm not ready to let go of this. And I, you know, I'm always like, well, pay attention to that. That's interesting. And there's probably a really good reason why, and hold on to it until you know what that reason is, you know? And I think an artist is always asking questions, right? And once the answers come is when I think artists can kind of let go of things a little bit. You know, and I think the more mature the artist is, you know, like as a profession, you know, you sell work gets broken, you know, things happen, right? And you do getting over it is okay. Like that's kind of part of the release. That's kind of it's okay. But also it's very it's also incredibly meaningful to share your work with people and see them enjoy it as well. Like that feels incredibly meaningful. Because if you just hoard it all in your studio and you never show anybody, you know, it's just you and your art, which is okay. But when it goes out into the world, that's a pretty meaningful experience.
Right.
Yeah, and I think I definitely agree with that in terms of like, you know, readiness to let go, but also like balancing that with sharing it. And then another thing I will say, the other part of what you asked about was criticism. And I think you have to, if you're gonna pursue your art in a way that is gonna be like, you're gonna open yourself up to criticism, like if you're gonna share it with people or, you know, things like that, then I think you have to develop coping to deal with that criticism, whether that's, you can still be attached to your art, but maybe seeing your art as always a work in progress, for example. So like you're not upset when it evolves, like, or, you know, or, but also maybe having boundaries of, you know, well, I don't want it to be too much in this direction, because then it's not even authentic to me, right? So it's like a balance of being open, but also finding ways that it doesn't hurt your self-worth, and like recognizing that it's part of the process. So I think, you know, if you're gonna open yourself up to that, yes, I think that's important to kind of, that's a vulnerability and a courage that people are, it's very courageous to do that. A lot of people wouldn't do that, you know, share something that's so intimate potentially with other people. Like that's, first of all, that helps like so many people, you know, when people can do that, people connect with that experience and know they're not alone. And so it's so beneficial to everyone when people do that. And it takes a lot of courage. And, you know, you do open yourself up to scrutiny, particularly if you're in a marginalized group, like if you're, you know, non-binary or woman or, you know, person of color, like all these different marginalized identities, like can, you know, even scrutinized even more so. So I think just finding ways that's not gonna hinder you, that yes, it's okay to be upset about it, but like also how can you grow from it and not have it like hold you back?
Right.
Yeah, I think Manijeh, you hit the nail on the head. It's about boundaries, right? And you know, those are hard to learn how to do. That's something that I learned to create those boundaries so that I could kind of protect myself. And I, you know, that's takes time to learn how to do that, you know. And for some of us who might not have had good examples of how to do that in our lives growing up, it's even harder. But I think that's exactly right. Going into critique or and, you know, understanding that, you know, not everybody's going to like my work, and that's okay. And I'm not going to like everybody else's work, and that's okay, you know. And then the other thing that I always tell myself and others is that, you know, I'm young in my practice. I'm still just I'm just practicing, right? Like that's and we're all just practicing. And you know, it's and I am in process, you know. And so there's, you know, sometimes you get it right and sometimes you don't. And then, you know, like really thinking about reflecting on, okay, well, why why did that not go the way I expected? Or now I see how, being reflective and mindful about some of that feedback is how you grow. And even the other thing that I talk to students about is filtering. So especially our graduate students, they endure a lot of critique. It's not always pretty, sometimes it can be kind of tough. Like I try to keep it always supportive, but honest. And I tell students that, you have to learn how to filter, because at the end of the day, you're going to get everybody's opinion, and whether it feels good or it feels bad, but you can filter people's opinions too. And you can decide, you know what, I don't agree with their opinion, and here's why. And the here's why part is how you become more of an artist. You define yourself more as an artist, because you're really thinking, you're defining yourself against other things. So, I think it all of those things are kind of what help you grow as an artist and kind of stay strong and handle the rejection and the acceptance, because there's going to be both.
Right.
And it doesn't mean you're good or bad, or you're right or wrong. Like, that's the weird thing about art in general, is that there's no, like, it isn't data driven. It's like, it's all shades of gray, right? So it's just kind of like, well, you like that shade and I like this shade, but they're all good.
Right. And it's interesting because when we look at art, like, there is no objective definition of what good art is. Like, just looking at, like, I think Van Gogh is probably the best, example of it, because his art wasn't popular when he was alive. And like, I believe now his Starry Night is the most, valuable piece of art that we like ever. And so, it's interesting because it's kind of like what you said, there is no right or wrong answer. How we see art changes over time, and people see art differently. So it's interesting. There is, no one set definition.
Or even just forget what good art is. What is even art, right? Like there's maybe forms of art that are more non-traditional. They're not as traditional, and maybe some people don't recognize those as art, or like, what's an artist, right? And who gets to define that? Like, I think that could have so many different definitions to different people. And so that's another thing I'm curious about when they've done this, collected this data on artists, is like, how did they define them? And because I just think it's just such a varied term.
Right.
Yeah, I think there's this other thing about, like, attainment, air quote, and this idea that one day I'll be an artist, right? And what does that mean? Like, I'll attain the title, right? Like, you just arrive and then that's it. And that is really a misunderstanding, because once you strive and reach some goal or pinnacle of what you're trying to do or say to the world, most artists are like, okay, next, what's the next one? So you live an art life. You're not just become an artist, tick, I'm done, like, this is it, I've got the official title, I'm a licensed artist now. There's nothing like that. It's just a constant practice. So I know really successful artists who have shown in huge museums, but they go back to the studio and then they make something that they are so disappointed with. Like, the vulnerability never goes away for artists. You're just constantly putting yourself out there and taking those risks. And sometimes, they go well, and sometimes when they don't go well, it's about how do you handle that part. Mm-hmm. And how do you grow from it?
And I think for every person, defining what, successful artist means for them too, like, I know people that successful artists for them means that they're enjoying their art, and that's okay. Yes. It doesn't have to meet like our societal definitions of what. Absolutely. So like, I think that's also very tailored to the individual.
I mean, isn't that interesting that we don't measure like joy as a type of success?
Yeah, definitely.
That says a lot about our culture.
Joy, hope, creativity. Yeah, that's one of my biggest issues with a lot of studies in psychology, is they're just looking at symptoms, which are important, of course, but not as much like factors of well-being.
Right. So just going back, this whole conversation, we're just, talking about, that link that there is between, art and mental health. So going off of that, do you think that there's a link between, maybe, we discussed in the last episode that art can be very therapeutic, can be beneficial. So do you think that a lot of people who struggle with mental health pursue art for that reason? Like maybe like they're always chasing this relief kind of thing? Or do you think that maybe it's more of like a correlation, not causation?
I'll leave it to the expert, Manijeh. I don't know that
Definitely,
one.
you can't say it's causation. Yeah, I definitely don't think you can say that. I mean, the research has not established that, I think, yeah, I think probably there's again, like parts of just being a little bit outside of the norm that draw people to both creativity and that, again, it's behavior outside the norm, right? And also you are creative, you're thinking a little bit outside the norm. So I think that that's maybe more of the overlap there. That's maybe the factor that's not necessarily causing that, but like a big contributing factor. It's very hard to say things cause things in psychology. It's way more complex usually. But maybe there's things about, being mentally ill that make you more in tune with suffering and in tune with, more aware of certain things in the world, and in some cultures, people that have some of the mental things that are considered in the US a mental illness, in some cultures might be considered more of like spiritual guides, and so I think like my point is just that, maybe like, again, it's culturally bound. And then also like being mentally ill, maybe that inspires you to maybe express yourself more as an artist or be more creative. And then also I think, again, like that, the way that you're treated, like if your art is maybe not valued or, things like that, that's going to take a toll on you after a while, So I think that also contributes. So I think there's a lot of things that contribute to that correlation. But no, I don't think that there's something inherently about art that's making people mentally ill or anything. Oh, also I was going to say something about something we were talking about earlier, because you asked about like, are you seeing, like you'd asked Alison if she's seeing more students with anxiety. And then you mentioned, Alison, that like the pandemic and everything. Well, working in college counseling centers for the last 10 years, there's just a high increase in mental health issues in colleges anyway, across the board, regardless of major. So that's just something that's across the board, So we're seeing it more when we invite those conversations when people are talking about it, but it's happening in a lot of fields, but they're not necessarily talking about it. So so these are like general trends too. So again, that kind of goes back to what I was saying, how maybe artists are just more in touch with that because they're more in touch with the self-expression. So when you express yourself, you have to have some awareness of your state, right? And so I think all of that plays a role. And this is particularly true, I think, if you're doing art that challenges norms or, challenges maybe some ingrained thinking, like the racist hierarchies we have, like all these different hierarchies we have in our society. Like, I think those are also, scrutinized more. And so yeah, I think all of those things contribute to that correlation.
Right. And this kind of goes back to we talked about having this stereotype, and if you don't fit into that stereotype, then you think that maybe it's not for you, or maybe you should pursue something else. And I remember always hearing oh, I can't be an artist because I had a good childhood, like stuff like that. So yeah, I feel like it's also part like you said, that maybe it seems like artists are like have more struggles with mental health just because we talk about it more. Like maybe it's all across different fields.
Yeah,
kind of
I think it's
not encouraged, like because of that. Like, so maybe they want to do art, or but they're told like, oh, you can't because you're not, or and not necessarily directly, but indirectly given that message that like you're not valid as an artist because you haven't struggled in this way. You know, I know people have been given that message, and that really can be impactful. So how many people are not going into it because of that, you know?
Well, yeah, the messaging is that, well, don't you want a real job? That, the students really have to fight to make art, to teach art. People don't think that it's a viable life career choice. And so those messages right there are kind of like, well, art is for those who can't, have real jobs, so I think it's all of those things that really kind of add up to it. But I will just throw out too that there is a little bit of a cliche there in the art school environment, where the weirder you are, the better. And everybody comes in and it's standard to be just different, like all the different different is cool. It's extremely acceptable to be deeply expressive about your identity. It's a pretty accepting environment, I like to think. And a lot of people who feel they're different in many different ways find acceptance in the art department.
Right.
So I think there is that, and people aren't really questioned or judged the way they might be in other circles.
Definitely. And I definitely see that trend of like when I look at people in my art classes, they're some of the most vibrant and interesting people that you can meet.
Yeah.
Like, even just looking at appearance wise, like they have like the coolest haircuts,
Oh yeah,
colors, all that kind of stuff. And you don't really see that in maybe other fields. Like when I'm looking at like my STEM classes, for example, because I'm a double major, art and in the STEM fields, you don't see that. Like everyone just kind of looks, streamlined. So
Yeah.
definitely, art classes are more of that space where you can kind of explore and be yourself and, really, express who you are, which I think is super cool. Cool. Well, I guess this might be, we're kind of wrapping up here. If we do have, someone who is maybe watching this or, someone at home or something, let's say they are an artist and they're struggling with mental health, what can they do? Big question, but
I suggest seeking help. There are therapists that specialize in working with artists. And one of the good things that came out of COVID is that expansion of like video therapy services. So with most insurance plans, you can actually see someone in the whole state because any of those would fit. And like now people are being more flexible with that. So that really expands like who you can see for therapy. And obviously that means more searching to find the right person and also like, looking up different profiles and seeing who seems like a good fit. Usually people have bios and such. So I would say seeking help. And actually that's for community for students. CAPS is the best resource actually. So CAPS is already part of your student fees. It's the counseling and psychological services on campus. And you've already paid with that with your student fees. So, and they have pretty good therapists there and they do wonderful groups. And so I would say just seek help. When I first started in this profession and they recommended it to me, and I thought, I don't really need to go. Like, I'm pretty okay. My family wasn't perfect, but they were fine. And then boy, was I wrong. I really did need to go. And I really had a lot to work on. And I'm so glad that they recommended it. I think anybody could benefit, and it's your treatment. So if the person's not good, unfortunately, there's bad therapists out there. You can always try to switch. You could try to, find someone that works, that you feel like you feel comfortable with opening up to. But I think that's like, therapy's backed by science. And I think that's a great way, or just, finding, if that's not accessible, people can find like at least mentors or look up resources. But I think when it comes to, having some mental health issues, particularly when it gets to a certain seriousness, I think, therapy can generally be something that is helpful.
Right.
Yeah, and I would just chime in and say that therapy has been the best gift I could have given myself. And so I think that I see it as a life maintenance tool, not just about, I don't have to be down and out, or don't be self-judging about it. Like, don't feel like, oh, it means I'm really bad if I have to get a counselor. No. I see it as, just life maintenance. It's really, really crucial to have that outlet, to talk to people without judgment, and to have and just to give that gift to yourself. So I strongly encourage it, and it's changed my life completely. So
Awesome.
Yeah, and I think also just real quick too, like just like if you were struggling with like a physical health issue, or you wanted some advice on how to improve your exercise or something, you might go to like a trainer or a doctor if it's like a physical health issue, right? So similarly, I think therapy is going to a professional, and whatever you want, like personal growth, maintenance, symptom like treating symptoms, like it can just be kind of tailored to what you want, but like with the help of an expert and someone who is your advocate, and like working with you on your journey. So yeah,
Awesome.
glad to hear it was helpful for you, Alison. That's wonderful. Always
yes, I loved it. I love it. Yeah, no, it's great.
Awesome. Well, thank you both so much for joining me. I really enjoyed our discussion. Thank you all to all of those at home who are watching this to the end. Thank you both again. I think I learned a lot personally, and I really enjoyed this discussion. So thank you again so much for joining me. For those of you who are watching, if you did like this, please be sure to like and subscribe, and maybe leave me in a comment if you really enjoyed what you heard. And by the time this comes out, it's going to be December, so I hope everyone has a good holiday season. This will be the last episode of season 3, so this was kind of like our grand finale. So for those of you who have stayed tuned, please be sure to check us out in the beginning of the year for season 4. So thank you all so much again. Everyone have a nice day, and thank you all for joining me. Bye-bye.